All right, folks, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is Kishore. I'm one of the co-founders of this SUG group in Chennai for the SUG session on Sitecore Commerce. In fact, it's a privilege to have Cristian Hann doing the honors with this session today. A wonderful gentleman, an MVP known in the Sitecore community, and quite an interesting topic. I think we all wanted this topic. In fact, when I was talking to a couple of folks on Sitecore, this is one topic where very few sessions actually happen, and we are kind of fortunate to have this session today here. So once again, on behalf of SUG Chennai, I invite Cristian Hann for this webinar, and over to you, mate. Thanks a lot for joining, and please do the honors, please.
So, shall I start?
Absolutely, Cristian. Stage is yours, mate.
Okay. Good. Thank you. All right, then. Thank you. Thank you that you joined the webinar. My name is Cristian Hann, and I would like to talk about the topic experiences with Sitecore Commerce and some best practices. So for that, I would like to first introduce Sitecore XC. So what stands behind this terminology, Sitecore XC? What is new? Maybe to give a rough overview about the whole topic. Then I would like to share some of my experiences I made the last 2 years while working intensively with this new system, and hopefully to give you an idea how to get into the topic easier than I did 2 years ago. And in the end, maybe to leave that overview, to leave that experiences, to come to best practices I learned from the last 2 years. So some overview of best practices, do's and don'ts to successfully work with Sitecore XC. So let's start. So the overview, I would like to show you a small history. So I joined this Sitecore Commerce journey with version 8.2.1. That's the middle part 2 years ago. Before that, we have this magic Microsoft Commerce Server, which covered all the features a commerce system had to do. With the new release of 8.2.1, Sitecore introduced a complete reworked commerce engine system, and in this, I would say, hybrid mode with this old Microsoft legacy commerce server. So this was the first approach of getting a footstep into that topic, Sitecore Commerce, on its own. And nowadays, 1 year ago, we had the release of version 9.0 and nowadays 9.03. which completely finalized the transformation from this old Microsoft server to the new commerce engine. Now I would like to show you what is the new commerce engine. So this new commerce engine is a .NET Core application, like many of the newest Sitecore implementations, like publishing service, like identity server, and some more. Sitecore relies on the newest and fastest and securest technology of Microsoft, the .NET Core. And you can see basically that commerce engine is just a web server. So in the basic, this is .NET Core. Around that, we have some foundation modules, some really basic functionalities, and some commerce core functionalities. Basically, that is not very much. What makes this commerce engine really powerful and what makes all the functionalities is what comes on top. That's the so-called plugin architecture. So if you have a look at Sitecore XC, you will see that it contains out of the box of a lot of plugins, like you can see catalog, cart, order, coupons, text handling. So a lot of plugins which can be, of course, as the name mentions, plug into the system, but also you can remove them safely from a system to only have that pieces you really want to have in your commerce system. That's also called as opt-in complexity. So Sitecore offers us really a bunch of plugins which we can use, but we do not have to use. So we could safely remove them or create our own ones. So this plugin architecture is easy extensible, easy adaptable, so we can really easy make your own functionalities in that. Then let's have a look at the features a new commerce system can handle. So you see a lot of buzzwords like cart, catalog, checkout, pricing, payment, promotion. All of that Sitecore Commerce offers and is really good at, like pricing and promotion engine, really powerful engine in the background which handles that. We have payment service provider like Braintree out of the box, but it's easy to include also other payment providers from all over the world in some kind of custom plugins. And we have a lot of more features, really powerful features. Then let's have a look at architecture, so from technical point of view. So we see on the right hand side the standard scaled architecture of Sitecore XC. The most important part is in the middle. So the top level is just the Sitecore XP with master, core, and web database, CM and CD system. And the bottom, you see the XDB data flow and what servers and database we have for XDB. In the middle, now we have the new components which come in when we talk about Sitecore XC. So the first thing is we have here in the middle the commerce engine, this .NET Core application. It is multiplied by 3. Why that is multiplied by 3, I will talk about later in the best practices. But basically, that is the new .NET Core application with all of the plugins. Below that, we have new databases like shared and global. These are databases which hold all our commerce data, like all commerce entities, orders, cards, customers, and so on and so on. And in addition to handle all these new information, to handle all these new kinds of items or kind of entities, Sitecore introduced, you can see it on the left hand side, the business tools, the standalone, also .NET Core application, with which you can maintain all our new commerce stuff. So can run on the CM system, but can also completely decoupled run on a dedicated server and can then be used by the CM system, by content author to maintain all our commerce stuff. So the content management system, the CMS part is not strictly coupled with that business tool. So then that was for the rough overview. If you want to hear more about general information of Sitecore XC and really architectural approaches or some buzzwords, I would say, or I would recommend you to join the Virtual Developer Day. There's also a session of mine with Sitecore XC from A to Z, which explains in really more detail about basic architectural stuff. And from that point on, I would like to start here with my personal experiences with Sitecore XC. So for that, I show you the timeline from 2017 on till now, only to show you what was my way to maybe help you to find your way into that topic, and maybe some best practices also here to get into that topic. So in 2017, Sitecore released this commerce version 8.2.1, and it was really completely new. It was nothing like that was there before. So I decided to have a look, to download it, to install it, to play around with it. Shortly after that, we also, as a company, got our first new client with Sitecore Commerce. And maybe you see the currently latest time point, first working instance of Sitecore Commerce 8.2.1. It really took me weeks, even months, to bring that initial release to life. So it was quite hard to work with that version. It was new. It felt like some kind of alpha or beta test, so really buggy. So Sitecore knew that, and it was just, I would say, first approach which was not production ready. So what was the next step? Next steps were this Sitecore XC, also known as Sitecore 9 releases. So this transformation fulfillment. So this completely new introduced commerce engine, which was really improved. So you see the initial release, and shortly after that, update 1 and 2. And what I did always, I downloaded the latest versions, had a look at the release notes, what changed, what was improved, and tested that version to get into that topic to really get what they changed or what they did not change. Then in between, only as a side note, we launched our first commerce MVP project, but basically on version 8.2.1. So now maybe some interesting part. In the end of 2018, it was not so long ago from today, I made my 200 certification. So I don't know if you know it, but also here my recommendation, Sitecore offers very good commerce certifications divided into sections like 100, 200, and 300. And this certification is was really helpful to get even more into that topic. But I did it very late, so I had this hard way to learn on the real platform, on Playground. My recommendation is for you to do it really early. So then we come to today. So update 3 was launched, also played around with that. And we know in the next weeks or months, Sitecore plans to also release Sitecore 9.1 in commerce. And also there I will spend some time on playing around, giving it a chance to see what has changed. And of course, our customer project went on with a planned big B2C launch, with a plan really to use all features to make all that fancy commerce shop. So what I wanted to demonstrate with that timeline is, the first thing, I was in this lucky position that we had a client with which I could test something, real customer requirements to play around to see how things work. And besides that, on my own, I worked with the version. So what you could take with you, what always helps, not only in XP, but in all other kinds of new technology, is read the release notes and type of documentation, install the bin storefront, and of course play around with the OOTB features, which these 3 things help me a lot to get into that topic. Might be obvious, might be clear, but for me as a recommendation, it's always a good idea to do that if you have time. After each release or 2 releases, just repeat all these steps. Then let's, I would say, go on. Of course, you played around with the features, and I would say you are today 2 years after the initial release. You're in a better situation. Like, what do you have to say? So, on you have, for example, the what could you say, the benefit. So 2.1, it was really, I would say, bad, but with version XC and 9.02 and 9.03, the product got more and more stable. Then, in addition, the documentation was really extended and improved. So in the beginning, there was only less documentation. You had to learn everything on your own. But today, really made progress in documentation. Then, of course, the rapidly growing commerce community. So, of course, more and more people get into the topic and share their knowledge. And what I mentioned, we have the certifications, which help a lot. We have Slack, we have Stack Exchange, community, and all other platforms to get into the topic. But, of course, there's more you can do. There's more how to go on. Of course, it's a good point to start, playing around, having a look at the documentation. But what happens if you go on? What happens if you have your first customer project and you have to extend stuff? You have to implement your own functionalities, implement new plugins, new feature. How would you do that? How can you see how the system works? So, for example, what happens if we implement our first custom functionality? What happens if we implement our first real business scenario? Will it be stable? Can it handle that? All these questions came into my mind, and my decision was, I tried it out. And from version 8.2.1 on till now, I'm already or always trying out things. I'm thinking of real customer scenarios, like you can see here. So for example, for a customer scenario, we had to make some adaptations to text handling. So we know from OOTB Texas plugin, this Texas plugin can only handle one single tax rate. So for example, 10% taxes. But in Germany, and I think also in many other countries, we have multiple tax rates. Like in our case, 7 and 90%. And this commerce system should also handle such kind of taxes. So from that point on, it's now obviously we should have extended via plugin. So I did that and on my own, and I made this plugin.xample.generic taxes to see how can I really fulfill the customer requirement. How did the system react? And with that, I also had insights into the existing features and learned more about the architecture. And of course, there are many more use cases and scenarios I thought of, like importing stuff, like syncing stuff, like order adaptations you can see below. And for all of these issues and for all of these requirements, I created some example plugins to see does it work. And if I had some issues, I reported them to Sitecore to see are they really issues or was I too dumb to really implement it correctly. That was my approach. And what I want to share with you is only really a small extraction, but an extraction of various sources of knowledge, like cannabis. We all know Akshay and his great post about commerce. You know, now doc.sitecore.com really improves the documentation, like my own blog post about commerce, like in the end Stack Exchange, and this special post from Peter where he described again every piece of information you have in the community to get into that topic. So what I want to say, you have a great community which helps today to bring the best out of the commerce system. And that's where I want to stop with experiences, with best practices in high level. So I want to start with some best practices on architecture, coding, like scenarios I encountered while working with commerce, while working with some clients, with some agencies, and I wanted to share them. So maybe all of you can maybe have the same scenario or similar scenarios, and maybe you all will come to that situation where you have to think about these problems. So I divided all the issues I have. I think a dozen issues. I divided them in architecture, coding, responsibilities, and support. So only a rough dividing into topics. And let's start with some architecture stuff. So it's high level for technical guys and for developers, but also good to know for all other people working with Sitecore Commerce. So the first thing for me, personally, quite important. And for me, I would say, and that's what I learned, a plugin in Commerce Engine is not a feature in HELIX architecture. So you all know maybe SXA and you all know HELIX architecture and Sitecore XC. And if you did not work with Sitecore XC by now and start working with it, it's really, you could really fast come to that point that you want to apply also HELIX standards in Sitecore XC. So what does that mean? Basically, it means, for example, we have plugin A and B and want plugin B to reference plugin A. So in a HELIX architecture-based styling, you would create a plugin C, like some foundation level, and then reference plugin B, that magic plugin C, and outsource the necessary component from A to C. Something similar to that. So the plugin A and B do not have any direct reference. What you could also do is this approach, a direct reference. And what you can see from the headline is that I would say, do that. Do the direct reference if you have a plugin which needs basic functionality, for example, from commerce system itself, from Sitecore itself, order, cards, fulfillment, or your own plugin. Let them directly reference each other, not each other, of course, particular dependencies, but in this case, plugin B, let it reference plugin A. And I'll tell you why. So it has something to do with that principle of opt-in complexity. So opt-in complexity, as mentioned, tells us we should be able to remove plugins we do not want to use completely. So by pulling them out of the system, they are completely gone. and our system gets smaller and perfectly fits to our business requirements. Imagine now the case that you have this plugin A, which outsources components to plugin C, and then you remove plugin A. This plugin C would not notice that directly. It would still have components from that plugin A you would have to remove by coding. So you're obligated to remove them manually, to get into that code and cut them out. That's not the way we should work with that dependencies. And in addition, if you, for example, want to use that plugin A in some other customer scenario, in some other Sitecore XP installation, the basic principle is also here, it should work. You should take out the plugin, use that DLL in there, the environment config, and just pull it into the other environment, into the other Sitecore XP solution, and it would work. In such a dependency scenario, you would also be obligated to also cut out plugin C and add it to another solution. But then we would have a lot of classes and a lot of components in plugin C we do not really want in that new solution. So like garbage we are taking with us, we have to remove them manually. So cases like that or issues like that make it even harder to then maintain this solution. So my recommendation is, as mentioned, let them directly reference plugin B to A. Like you can also see in the screen I showed earlier, also Sitecore does it. Sitecore says, if I have, for example, an orders feature, you can see in the middle, the orders plugin, it needs some kind of card. You know, an order is just an extension of a card with some new fields. Order is just referencing this card plugin and using it and extending it. So direct reference is also working here perfectly fine. So basically there's architecture, but not really HELIX as you might know it from XP. Then another point is use standard functionalities as often as you can instead of reinventing the wheel. Might be obvious, but for some cases it could also happen that you try to do that, try to reinvent the wheel, try to make your own thing. But you should go one step back and see what can the commerce system already do and how can I extend that commerce system. So for example, I already saw that example that the task was to implement a new fulfillment method. So maybe you know or not, Sitecore has already a powerful fulfillment system or powerful functionalities for fulfillment. So in Commerce Connect, we have some items to handle that, payment and fulfillment. In Commerce Engine, we have also some functionalities like set card physical fulfillment, set card digital fulfillment. And in the end, we also have policies which can be applied to that, which hold information. So that would be possible. But the approach I saw was to really create new functionalities, new components to, in the end, work around that standard functionality. But what I already said, there is functionality and you could use it and you should use it. So you should see where can I extend it. So in our case for fulfillment, it would be quite easy. You would just have to add a new item in Commerce Connect and add one new policy set, and everything would work perfectly fine with effort like that, I don't know, half an hour instead of days. So it's also some kind of effort you waste in implementing stuff. So that's what I said. And the outcome, of course, is if possible, try to use standard components and extend these standard components instead of completely build your own stuff. It is possible, and at some point you should do it, but try to avoid that. Then, better expose functionalities in Commerce Engine over pipelines instead of services for sales and others. So what do I mean with that? In Sitecore XP, you might know this, that we are going from a monolithic architecture to service-oriented architecture. So like SXA shows us, and also other approaches show us that we have a controller, and in the end, behind the controller, the core logic is implemented in some kind of repository, service, or whatever you call it. But it's not in the controller directly. We have some kind of service in the background. For Sitecore XP, this approach would not be the best approach because Sitecore XP is built on the core pipeline architecture. So everything around SITECOREXP is built that you use pipelines. Also, all standard OOTP features use pipelines in the end. This is a good approach for SITECOREXP because on the one hand side you have a new logging mechanism, so new log files to see the status of all your pipelines and all your blocks within your pipeline. So blocks are processors and SITECOREXP. In SITECOREXP these are blocks, and you see the current state of all your pipelines. And for example, it makes it really, really easy to see pipelines, to see the current state of pipelines, and also in your plugin to hook into these pipelines with your custom functionality to adapt these pipelines, or even to completely remove them or remove blocks. So of course you can do the approach via services, via sales and so on, but it would be much harder for another developer to see that functionality instead of using pipelines and blocks, which is even more obvious to another developer, and it's the standard approach of executing a piece of functionality in XC. Then, if possible, use commerce entity lists for performance reasons. So let's start with a use case. The use case could be in SITECOREXP. You have the requirement to grab all orders and filter all orders by, for example, pending orders, so that in the end you only have all your pending orders in the system. What you could do is, of course, grab all orders and then make some kind of filtering, but that would be quite inefficient. Of course, the number of orders is increasing day by day, and the system would get slower and slower. What Sitecore has is a mechanism like entity lists. Entity lists, in the end, are just lists which hold entity IDs, just a string with an entity ID. And these lists are, you could say, a logical grouping of entities. So, for example, for our orders, Sitecore provides us with various entity lists which hold all our orders in different logical differentiation, like pending order, problem order, waiting for ability. All the order status we have has each of that has its own entity list. So, for example, if the requirement is grab all pending orders, we just have to access these entity lists, for example, with a minion, and then grab all these entity IDs, get the order, and then do something with it. So we do not have to filter facets or do whatever we want. So this would be an even more performant way of doing that. And of course, if the standard commerce entity lists are not sufficient enough, you can also easily create entity lists on your own. So the example is here. For example, on an entity, you just have to grab the component. It's a special transient list membership component and just add a new membership. In this case, it's simply a string, which is the name of the new entity list. If it's not there, Sitecore would directly create that list. And if it's there, it would just add these entities. In this case, it was an order to my new entity list. And if I want to consume that list, of course, I can create a minion which grabs all these entities in this list and do something with it. And if that minion, for example, decides to remove that item from the list, below you see the code. It's a custom remove list entities pipeline. And if you execute that, the current item, the current entity is removed from the entity list. So very easy to assemble all of your entities in logical lists. So then let's talk about some responsibilities, which might be obvious, but I would like to also demonstrate why they are obvious and why they are so important. So imagine you have some requirements while implementing your commerce system. So we have a requirement that the customer wants us to have a minimal order value. The minimal order value is, I guess, a standard requirement. So what you could do, if you are not familiar with SITECOREXP, but familiar with SITECOREXP, just implement that functionality in SITECOREXP, in, for example, your card feature. So you would grab some kind of card, check the values like grand total, and check if that grand total is higher or not against some predefined setting. Of course, this would work, and of course, it has exactly that target that it should have. but it would also bring us some drawbacks, like I mentioned in the third column. So the drawbacks would be such kind of calculations can easily get very complicated. Like in commerce, we have various different amounts, like subtotal, grand total, we have a fulfillment fee, we have different discounts, and so on. We have taxes in there. So maybe the customer has a really complex calculation which should be included in minimal order value and which should not be included. So Sitecore XP would maybe have a lack of information or lack of these complex calculations. And second of all, imagine you have different endpoints which should communicate with Sitecore, which should communicate with that commerce engine, like not only Sitecore but also a mobile app like Postman and various other endpoints. And then let's assume that mobile app directly calls the engine. It would not know about these implementations made in that very specific card feature. Of course, you could also make some kind of foundation implementation. So every call which runs through Sitecore can handle that. But for example, like Postman would never know about these implementations. So it would be a better idea to have a single source of truth, like the commerce engine, and to let commerce things so commerce engine calculate all the commerce things like amounts, like thresholds, like conditions. So the better approach would be to go in Sitecore XP, create a new plugin, hook into the right positions, like get card pipeline. In that get card pipeline, we can easily grab all the information mentioned earlier to determine our minimal order value and to give it to Sitecore XP if it is reached or not. And of course, in the create order pipeline, we also can include some validation which forbids an order creation if the minimal order value is not reached. Quite easy if you know it. So the second point with responsibility would be do not change the status of an order manually within your plugin. So for that, I would like to show you or to tell you how you could easily change an order status. So there is some kind of command which you can consume, which you can use, set order status command. It's shown here. You can use that command with some .peak extraction, and it would do exactly what you want to do. So you give an order, and the order is, for example, pending, and you want to transition this order to waiting for availability or problem on any other state. This command would exactly do what you want. But now the drawback starts. What is the problem with that approach? The problem is Sitecore itself has a very powerful order transition functionality in the background. So especially for orders, Sitecore has entity lists, like you know from earlier, and it has minions, like you can see here, pending order, minion. We have a corresponding pipeline for that minion, which is executed for each order. And within that pipeline, we have a very powerful mechanism of checking, is the order valid, is it in the right state, how can we transmit the order to another state and correctly transmit that order to another state. Like for example, removing the order correctly from the first entity list and add it to the next entity list. Like some processes around that, simply changing the order status is also done by Sitecore itself. So my recommendation is, if you want to change an order status, just hook into that pipeline of the minions and implement your logic there instead of doing that completely on your own. You would cause some side effects. So let's go on in coding. Coding is, I guess, one of the most important things, like to make it life easier, to make things easier. Like start with use service proxy if possible instead of implementing web requests on your own. What does that mean? So we know Commerce Engine exposes its API via OData, the standard protocol. And of course, it is possible to consume that OData interface with some kind of service proxy. Also, Sitecore provides us with an implementation of that service proxy. So basically, we have in the very beginning Commerce Connect. So of course, we can use Commerce Connect to consume the OData interface of our Commerce Engine. But we quickly come to the point that Commerce Connect is not enough. So we extend the Commerce Engine with new functionality. Commerce Connect does not know. So what we have to do is we have to decide if we want to use the direct web request or the OData interface. And my recommendation for that is, of course, use the generated OData interface. The right-hand side is what it's meant to use the web client directly. So you would have to add the headers manually, the upload data manually. So everything which is benefit of using service proxy would be gone. And yeah, this would make life even harder. In the beginning of our customer project, we used that approach. That's one approach of in the very beginning, and we refactor that code to use the service proxy in the end. And also here's an example of Commerce Connect. To see Commerce Connect just uses in the very, very core pipeline, it uses a proxy. So for example, then add card lines, it has a pipeline to handle add card lines. It triggers some analytics events, and it communicates with the OData via OData with the commerce engine. That's the top right image here. So the same way you could also provide in XP the interfaces with XC. Then let's talk about policies. Policy is, I start with a quote of the Sitecore documentation. What is a policy? So basically it's just a piece of setting in Sitecore XC. So what you had earlier in XP, like a config file or setting item in the global area, we have now policies. And with policies, it is, I want to show you how you could handle policies. So this piece of information you could load on startup time. It's iStart node pipeline, but to know that's the pipeline which is called when this engine starts. You could grab the policies, all the policies which are existing, store in some magic static class, and then consume it on every call. And you could imagine that it is quite performant way. But the issue with that is that policies are dependent on the environment from which it is called. So basically, we are able to define different environments, like basic environments like B2B store and B2C store. And for each store, we have a different environment in Sitecore XC and also different storefronts in Sitecore XP. So imagine you have a Sitecore B2B store calling the engine and a Sitecore B2C store calling the engine. In the end, in the engine, we would have two different environments handling these calls. And in each environment, we are able to set different policies, different sets of policies. So keep that in mind. If you now think of, we are on startup, just having one set of policies and saving it. That's the issue. We are just calling one environment on startup and saving one special environment's policies. So what seems like a benefit is in the end a really, really bad approach, because on runtime, we do never evaluate against our current environment. So if the environment changes, for example, on startup, we started the engine with the B2B environment and get the settings from that. And on runtime, we call it with the B2C environment. We would never get the correct policy because the saved settings are B2B and not B2C. So my recommendation is always use the current context to grab the right policy. And the next point, I'll show you in detail how you do that and what that means. But the next point is closely coupled to that issue. So do not hardcode storefront or project-specific stuff within your plugins. Like you could imagine, we have a plugin and you want to have a very specific functionality only for very specific shop, like B2B. Could also, instead of blah blah, you could say if equals B2B and then do B2B magic. That's a really bad approach, because a plugin should never be so dependent of Sitecore XP. So this storefront name is highly, highly dependent on the Sitecore XP installation. So if you pull out the plugin and put it in to another Sitecore XP installation, most likely this plugin would not work anymore because it's too hard-coded. So the better approach would be use environments, use policies to trigger different functionalities. So instead of here using if else and storefront, you could just create a policy dependent on the environment, like B2B, B2C, and any other environment, and just wrap the policies on runtime based on your current environment and then react correctly on that instead of using any if-else construct. And how easy it is to grab the environment and to grab policies, it's shown here. So on the right-hand side, we have our environment file with my magic generic taxes policy. And you see the JSON, it's just key value pair. And on the left-hand side, we have our policy class. And what is done, it's just mapped one-to-one. So all our setup values on the right-hand side are correctly transferred, I would say, to the class, which can then be on runtime got by context.getPolicy. So with that call, we ensure that we always get the correct policy based on our current environment instead of remember the last point, instead of getting it incorrectly by retrieving our policies via static class or something like that. So always evaluate policies on runtime and always think of, instead of hard coding stuff, use policies and use environments. So as mentioned, the next point is, I would say, quite important, and it shows some of the basic concepts of pipeline, like how we create pipelines and build up our blocks in pipelines. So what you see is the standard approach. For example, I created for some German loyalty point provider Payback, I created a pipeline to apply some payback points with 3 different blocks. That's a pretty standard approach. And the benefit of using that is, if you have a look at the node configuration file, which I mentioned earlier, you see directly after startup my new pipeline with all the blocks, with all the input-output parameters. So great for debugging reasons, great to see if everything worked well, to see is the pipeline applied correctly, are the blocks all there, is everything working as expected. So what I saw now is some other approach, again, over some, I would say, magic static manager class, which holds in the end all the references of all our pipelines. So some demo code you can see here. This manager class is simply a static class which has a dictionary, and within that dictionary you can have a definition. For example, some request order state open, closed, partially refunded, whatever state we have, and we add there our blocks and do whatever we want. That approach, of course, works. In the end, we have pipelines in the system, and in the end, we can retrieve these pipelines by definition. But what are the drawbacks of this approach? So doing it this way and not the standard way, we have the problem that such kind of patterns do not appear in our node configuration file. So for example, when I encountered such a pipeline first time, I was not able to find the corresponding code which produced that pipeline. So I had to look at the node configuration file, nothing found. I had to look at each feature till I found this piece of code. And that makes debugging and editing and adding stuff for other developers even harder and harder. So my recommendation here is, strongly recommendation is, again, use the standard approach. Don't over-engineer stuff. Don't think of new fancy ways of handling stuff, of doing stuff. Maybe you would lose some really, really great advantages of the standard approach. That's my recommendation. Then we are already close to the end. Some important part is the infrastructure. So an important thing is use roads for scalability in SITECORE. So in the beginning, remember, I told you the engines are multiplied by 3. And why they are multiplied by 3 and why their location is so important, we'll see now in this little example. Let's assume we have a minimal scenario like one CM, one CD system, and one single commerce engine server. So every traffic from authors, from visitors, would be led through the commerce engine. Of course, this is not enough to have only one commerce engine because the traffic is too much for one single commerce engine. So the first approach, real life approach, would be just make multiply by 3 and add a load balancer before these commerce engines, and then some kind of magic sticky session, and everything would work. Of course it would work, but I can tell you it's not the way SITECORE wants us to scale. So the way SITECORE wants us to scale, or what SITECORE recommends us to scale, is the following approach. It's the approach via roads. So you see we have again 3 engines, but the location of the engines and the responsibilities of the engines have changed. So we have on the left-hand side one, on the right-hand side, and on the bottom one single engine. So one engine on the left-hand side, the authoring role engine, is responsible for only serving the traffic from authors, from the business group, to maintain all our commerce stuff. The right-hand side is highly specialized to handle visitor traffic. So, for example, it has settings like a harsh caching, like performance-oriented caching, and stuff like that. And the last engine below is a minions role, which has just the task to let some background tasks work and has no influence on the real, I would say, CM or CD system. So it's completely standalone. What I want to say here is, in addition, that these three engines are basically from physically and from the code here, from the code, it's completely the same. So we deploy 3 times the same engine in the end to 3 servers. The only thing which changes is the configuration. This environment file is slightly different. So this role-based scaling is just a logical split of all our engines, but it's really powerful to, in the end, make a high scalability. Here is a little, I would say, table. So a little table about all the roles which might exist in your system or which might exist in your environment, and some key features like what traffic do they serve, where should they be located, from which, I would say, user group is used, and what is the main task. So keep such a table in mind when you set up your environment. What roles do you really need and what roles you don't need, and which tasks you have. And I think then the scalability is much better than without doing that. Then, last but not least, the support part. Support part, I think, is quite important because we developers, we all need support while implementing stuff. We all need help. We are all stuck somewhere. So support is quite important. And again, because it's so important, I would mention it again in a separate section, this node configuration file. It's a new log file which shows the current state of all our pipelines based or implemented in the system. So for example, if I have to answer the client a question, can the engine do this or that, or what do I have to do to apply new prices on the card, or to apply new prices on the detailed pages of some products, the first thing I do is, okay, I will have a look. I open that log file and enter something like get price, get list price, get card price, and then I try to find the corresponding pipeline which is responsible for that specific task to answer the client's question. Okay, I found the pipeline, I know what to do. .peak helps me a lot to get into the blocks, for example, to see how it's implemented, and then with that file, with that information, I can answer the client's question. Okay, I just write a new block and add it here, and then everything is fine. So when I'm stuck, when I want to see the current state, or even in consulting phases, it's really great to have such a file which shows us the current state of the commerce system. So just for you as a reminder, keep that in mind. We have such kind of file where we have access to. Then the very last thing I would like to mention, because I'm encountering it very often, that, for example, some developers are stuck, some developers are trying to fix bugs from Sitecore, and I'm asking them, did you already create a Sitecore support ticket? Because it's obvious that there's some bug. So did you create a support ticket? And the answer is, no, we don't. We have no time. We try to fix it on our own. That is okay. Yes, you can do that. But in my opinion, also, a Sitecore support ticket should be created for obvious bugs of Sitecore. So what I did in 8.2.1, for example, I mentioned it. It felt like an alpha test. It felt like it falling from one error to another error to the next error. But what I did is I took the time and created a lot of Sitecore support tickets. And every ticket, you see it on the right-hand side, I think it was in the end up to 30 or more than 30 tickets, various tickets like reported bugs, documentation wishes, some unclear things, some broken stuff. So everything was there. and Sitecore supported me. Sitecore helped me, accepted everything. But what happened in the end was really, really great, because in the next releases, I had an eye on the next releases. I saw that most of the bugs, nearly every bug, was then covered in the next releases and was fixed in the next releases. So my opinion is, only if we report bugs and misbehavior to the system, Sitecore is able to recognize and fix those things and make the product overall more stable. So it means if you fix it on your own, the next release will not be better. So you have to fix it again. If we report misbehavior to Sitecore, they are able to fix the bug. So it's like a coexisting developer and Sitecore, and it makes life very, very easy and more easier. So this was the last topic. Only for your information, that's me, Cristian Hann, Sitecore consultant, freelancer, and commerce MVP 2018 and 19. If you are interested in more topics about Sitecore commerce, you can visit my blog. You can visit the next week virtual developer days and some other user groups. I'm happy to talk always and all the time. So that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, Cristian. So I have a couple of questions. So regarding the Commerce Connect API, right? So only that API we have to use, or we can go with SConnect to consume or expose data on analytics part.
What do you mean?
Able to hear me?
Yeah, now I hear better. So you talked about Commerce Connect and XConnect, you said?
Yeah. So to consume or expose data, we have to only go with Commerce Connect API, or for analytics part, still we have to use XConnect?
Yes, of course. So of course, for the direct communication to the engine, you use Commerce Connect. It's just like functionalities like get order, get card. And for analytics stuff, there's a bunch of analytics in the background. You still use XConnect and customize your XConnect functionality with that.
Okay. So about scaling. Okay. So how many service we can have in the under the minion roles? For instance, for order processing or shipment, those and all. Can we have our own server roles?
Of course, because server roles are only logical. So if you extend them, if you create own roles or multiply them, it's completely up to you, up to your requirements. So for example, in our use case, it was totally okay to have everything on one single server. So for example, like the CM system authoring and minion on one single server, but you could also scale it up to every server infrastructure you want to have it. It's only logical differentiation.
Okay. So Sitecore is recommending any plugin for service like payment or shipping, or any well-tested services available in the market, or anything is tested on payment and shipping part?
Yes, for shipping, I don't think there's anything pre-built, but for payment, Sitecore is delivered with Braintree as OOTP payment service provider. But for any other payment or shipping provider, you would have to create your own plugin. I think also the Sitecore agencies partners have high effort to implement some parts of payment and fulfillment and shipping.
Okay. So regarding the indexing and caching, still we have to go with the existing mechanism, or any dedicated stuff is built by Sitecore on indexing and caching part on commerce side?
For indexing it's quite difficult, because we have an index in XP and we have some kind of indexing in XC, and they have to be synchronized. So for example, the business tools use XP indexing, but the commerce server uses XC indexing. But as mentioned, if you use the standard functionality, all the indexing stuff, all the stuff in the background, you might see it in the graphic, is handled then by Sitecore. With caching, honestly, I have no experience by now. So this commerce server was quite performant, so we did not have the need to adapt some kind of caching. So OOTP caching settings were okay by now.
Okay. Thank you, Cristian. And also, it would be good if you plan to conduct a few more webinars to see the real-time demo, how to set up and work on these commerce stuffs.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Is there any questions from anyone? Any further questions, guys? All right, we are just in time. On behalf of Sitecore user group in Chennai, Kishore again here. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Cristian Hann for this wonderful session. In fact, it was quite insightful to cover from the architecture aspects of it, as well as talk about his experience and best practices as well. The cue or the takeaway for us from this session, probably I would say, is to try our hands ourselves, as well as recommended by Hans. It will be good for us to take up the Sitecore Commerce certification. And above all, he's always there in the Slack as well as in the community. So if you have any further questions or doubts, feel free to reach him. And I once again thank Cristian Hans for coming forward for this session, and looking forward to have more such sessions from you, Matt. Thanks a lot once again.
You're welcome.
Thank you, folks, for joining. Hope you enjoyed this session. Looking forward to meet you all again in the next session. Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.
Thank you, Cristian. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Sure.